This week, we are discussing staying creative and maintaining creativity with Jennifer Batts. You are listening to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas Albert, and this week I am joined by Jennifer Batts, a Michigan-based landscape photographer, portrait photographer, and connoisseur of workshops across North America. In this discussion, Jennifer shares her many experiences across multiple workshops under different photographers and how she bridges the gap between burnout and creativity in many unique and inspiring ways. Her work includes everything from senior portraits to the Milky Way, and landscapes from the East Coast to the West Coast and back again. This was a very fun discussion with invaluable insight into not only staying creative, but maintaining that creativity throughout the year with different approaches, techniques, and applications that she has learned across her journey as a photographer. The images discussed in this episode are linked in the show notes below so that you can check them out as we discuss them. I encourage you to visit her website, her social media pages, give her a follow, and join her on her journey right here in the Great Lakes and beyond. Let's go ahead and jump into this week's discussion with Jennifer Batts. Great to have you on the show. Really excited to discuss some of your experiences, some of your background. What got you started in photography? How long have you been a photographer for?
Well, I like to tell people that I got started in photography as a kid when I picked up one of my dad's 35 millimeter film cameras. We had a collie as when I was little, and I would take him around the neighborhood and pose him in different locations and take pictures of my dog. And it's something I've always loved, but sucked at for a long time until I finally got a kind of one of those early SLR-like cameras and started learning some more about it as an adult. And then, just kind of kept going. I've loved landscape photography for years, and then also got into portrait photography as well after I had my own kids. Yeah, so I would say it's been an ongoing thing since probably my 20s, but started back when I was pretty young.
That's great, especially with the pictures of the dog, because
Yeah.
that's something that I used to do too. I had a old instant film camera that I started on, and I would take pictures of the cats, the dog. When I was a little kid just trying to be creative in the world, I remember I got in trouble once because I took my mom's lamp out of the living room and I went and put it in the backyard. I thought I was breaking boundaries with creativity, and my mom's just like, "What are you doing with my lamp in the backyard?" But that's awesome backstory. You do landscapes and portraits. How much of your focus is on each? Are you kind of split evenly, or?
So I like to tell people I make money from my senior portrait photography and I spend it on my landscape photography. Um, my focus for portrait photography is high school seniors, and here in Michigan, that season runs from late June until the end of October. So that's kind of my busy season with that, although, of course, that does run into a lot of good landscape photography time as well. Um, so try to I try to travel 2 to 4 times a year to do. We'll talk about. I love to do photography workshops to be a participant, and then I just kind of do my own landscape photography throughout the year. You know, spring comes and the flowers are out, and you'll find me on my stomach in the neighborhood photographing bulbs and tulips. So I would say the landscape and nature stuff is kind of sprinkled a lot throughout the year, and then the high school senior portrait photography is really intense in the summer and fall.
Yeah, that makes sense with graduations and people getting ready to get the cards out and they want to get ahead of the game. Do you combine the two ever where maybe you find a really cool landscape and you think, hey, this is a cool spot, but it would be much cooler with a human element?
Actually, all the time. So I am a on location portrait photographer. So most of my senior sessions run 2 to 3 hours. We often a lot of seniors, especially girls, like fields of flowers, the beach. I do streams, I do woods. I do very little stuff actually in any kind of studio or indoors location. So I I wish I could get my seniors a little bit further abroad. Sometimes sometimes we'll drive up drive up US 131 up north and be like, oh, if I could just take a senior here, this would be amazing. Oh, if I could just do a portrait here, this would be amazing. Um, so yeah, there's definitely a combination of the two in my work.
That's something that I always think about when I'm out doing landscape photography is adding scale, adding that human element into an image to really show the size of some of these places. Like, as a landscape photographer, maybe you go and shoot a waterfall or you're at an overlook or what have you. And sure, it looks beautiful, it's exciting, but adding that little human element in there, it really kind of sets the tone and it can actually change things so much. And different landscapes tell different stories. And I feel like that's a great way to kind of blend those two areas of creativity together with kind of exploring throughout the year. And then in the back of your mind, thinking, hey, this would be a great spot to take someone, kind of having that in your back pocket. That's got to be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, so as a portrait photographer, it's still really important to remember that you need to shoot what you love. I know what sells. The stuff that sells are the close-up portraits, um, having a person fill more of the frame, but it's always really good to supplement that with the stuff that's fulfilling to you as well. It's that some of the different images and some of those environmental portraits that are the person in the scene, giving scale to the scene, giving, emotion to the scene, those are important. Even if nobody buys them, I can do them for myself and it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, you can put that in your portfolio and it's just one more thing. And I feel like especially with portraits, it it's a big sell these days. A lot of people want to do the outdoor stuff. I feel like photography has moved away from a studio setting, if you will, and a lot more people are interested in just being outdoors, especially after COVID. Everybody is all about the outdoors. Everybody is wanting to incorporate that natural element. So I imagine that's a big part of what sells and being able to put those images on your website. I mean, that's got to be, enticing for people to say, hey, yeah, I want an image like that. Even if it might not sell, it's still a great portfolio piece.
Absolutely. And yeah, you know, I remember when I was a high school senior and, you sat in a studio and you did the same pose all your friends did and wore the same sweater everybody else did. But when I work with seniors, they want to be who they are. And their parents want to have their personality captured in a natural and relaxed way, not super forced posing. And so, being in a natural environment just lends itself to that as well. So, yeah, it's definitely kind of the times that we're in to just have portraits be a relaxed and a casual, natural type environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like it builds into that creativity, the just getting out there and remaining creative because you're looking at it from two different angles. One, you're looking at it as a landscape photographer, so you're immediately drawn to the places that are beautiful, the places that are inspiring and evoke those emotions of, wow, yeah, look at this incredible overlook or waterfall or forest area, whatever the case might be. And then blending the two different approaches together, I mean, I feel like that would just be hugely beneficial in creativity. As far as creativity goes, what does staying creative mean to you as a photographer that works in both of these genres?
Sometimes, with portraiture, it can be challenging to stay creative. I love each and every senior that I work with and have a great time, but sometimes, you get a lot of girls who say, "Oh, I want fields of flowers and the beach." And I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, "Can we do something else other than the beach?" There's a limited amount of creative options I could come up with at the beach that haven't been done 27,000 times before. Um, so, sometimes it involves kind of looking through other people's work as inspiration, and sometimes it's just working with the person and the personality that they come with in an environment. And when I'm working in on a session, there'll be moments where I'm like, it's okay to just stand here and think for a minute and just kind of let my brain relax and consider what new can we do or what's going to be authentic to this person, and not feel uncomfortable with it. And I also like to joke, I'm the photographer who will say, "Okay, I think we're done, let's wrap up," and we walk back for 30 seconds. I'm like, "Oh wait, oh no, this would be really cool, let's do that." um, so and the other thing is that I am a real low volume senior photographer. I typically only take about one client a week. Um, because there's also tons of stuff on the backside of that. There's the editing, there's the ordering appointment, there's designing the products, ordering that as well. But I don't want to be someone who is just churning out the same things over and over again, and giving myself the mental space to say, I'm going to give, everything to this client on this day. And then I have some downtime to think about, okay, you know, what went well in this session? What could I improve in the future? Um, and then just do other things for a while. Um, helps helps me, I think, keep things fresh, keep things interesting and enjoyable.
And I like that approach of not only are you committing not just to your craft, but to the people, your seniors that you're working with and their families, that you're committing to them wholeheartedly. You're not just trying to pump out person after person, image after image, and you're doing it one senior a week, focusing on that creative aspect and giving them something that's equally unique. That's great, especially with the creativity piece between both landscapes and portraits, because it's that authenticity. It's making sure that, like you said, you don't want to be producing images or poses or what have you that have been done 27,000 times. You want that originality in doing things with that approach between portraits and landscapes. Has there been a moment where you just faced creative burnout between landscape photography, portrait photography, maybe both?
I would say in general, I haven't faced burnout in landscape photography because it is more, I don't do it as much. It is something I very much do for myself. And when I travel, it's kind of my getaway time to just be me as a photographer, without some of the other responsibilities that come from being a parent and whatnot. Um, Typically, though, I will say that burnout kind of comes at the end of the season, and it's not necessarily reflected in the sessions themselves. It's just in the energy level. When it's the end of October and you're stressed about the weather and do you have to reschedule this session and things are starting to build up and get on top of each other, so you just kind of have to get through that, that moment and those obligations because the people who are getting a shoot on October 23 want the same quality and experience that those who are getting a shoot on July 23 do. So you just have to get through it. And I'm fortunate in that in my photography work that there is a seasonality to it. And once I get through, I could catch my breath and put it aside for a little while and then get excited about what's coming for the next season.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Similar to you, I was doing portraits and weddings to fund my landscape adventures and my gear and what have you. And, this was between like 2010 to like 2014, 2015, where I was really big into doing weddings and all that stuff. And I can totally relate. You know, there were weekends where I'd have a wedding on Saturday and then another one on Sunday. And it's like, yeah, you're tired. You're facing that like, oh, do I have to? But like you said, people expect that same quality, and they're coming to you because you can deliver. So, that's totally relatable. I'm sure there's other listeners out there that may do same thing you do with, maybe they do portraits or weddings or what have you and do landscapes on the side as kind of their own thing, that little escape away from the everyday. How does landscape photography challenge creativity differently than portrait work?
Well, I would say that, one similarity between the both before I go to the difference is no matter what, you're still looking for light. Whether it's portrait work or landscape work, you're looking for the light, you're shaping the light, you're working with light. And as one of the workshop leaders I love and have gone to attended many workshops once said, she's like, you know, what what do you see? What is drawing your attention? What is it that is connecting with you in this moment? And that is what you need to be shooting. So, I mean, there's those kind of things are similar with, what is it that is just making your heart sing right now? What is it that's making you excited? And I think those things are applicable to both fields of photography. And so that's kind of a guiding principle that shapes my work in both areas is finding what is just capturing my attention, what's making me happy. Um, so and then when the challenge is then moving to landscape photography is often it's narrowing down a scene, it's finding focus in the chaos, especially like when you're in the woods or something. Um, and just it's a different approach. Like when I shoot my seniors, I'm typically shooting at f2.8, like almost all the time. And the results are great because the subject's in focus and everything else is kind of blurry. Well, you can't always just do that. You don't have three dimensions when you're looking at an image. You're stuck with two. So you've got to figure out, okay, how can I convey depth? How can I convey, um, how can I make sense out of this chaos to find an image that is really capturing what I want without distractions? And so, as fast as portrait work can go, you're taking all these pictures in the space of 2 to 3 hours, then the landscape photography is slower and more deliberate. And you kind of have to just breathe and wander around and let yourself settle before you can start going.
That's something that I feel it's kind of applicable in all approaches with photography is, you kind of have to like with landscapes. I know one thing that I always do is I get real excited when I'm getting close to the location I'm going to be staying at, and I get out of the car and I'm just like, yes, I'm here. I'm going to take pictures of everything. I'm going in every direction and I'm putting images together in my mind. And it's like that, what you mentioned, where you got to just slow down. You got to breathe. You got to let it all kind of settle in. So in that, you had mentioned that you attend workshops, and as I understand, you attend a lot of different workshops. What does that mean for you in drawing inspiration from other photographers? How have they influenced your creative growth, and what is drawing inspiration from those workshops and that creativity piece? What does that look like for you?
So that's a great question. As a landscape photographer, who actually I'm located in Holland, Michigan, and I love Michigan. I love Michigan landscapes. I started probably the biggest influence in my photography development has been from the workshops that I've attended. I started with Michigan-based workshops. You may have heard of Todd and Brad Reed up at Ludington. I worked with a guy and his wife who did a workshop in the Upper Peninsula in the Munising area. And those were just so impactful for me in really learning about nature and landscape photography, starting with a lot of the basic elements of composition and editing, that I just knew that I wanted to do that more often. I loved the people that I met. I loved the different photographers that I met and the different things that I was learning from them. Every professional photographer kind of has a different take or a different thing or a different type of editing that they teach. And so I knew that I wanted to explore more and continue to learn more. And the odd result of that is that though I am a Michigan based photographer, the vast majority of my nature and landscape photography takes place outside of Michigan because I am a mother. I have two teenage kids who seem to want dinner every night of the week, even if there is a good sunset happening. And so it just gets a little harder to break out of the routine when you have these other commitments. So when I'm able to travel, like I said before, I can just focus on photography. So that gives you, I mean, it's like an intensive education every time. And I have now met, dozens of phenomenal professional photographers who are just so happy to share their knowledge of approaches to photography, the areas that they love, the regions that they know really well and can take you to. So many different editing skills and techniques that I've been able to use and incorporate into my own process. And so every time I go, even if I feel a little rusty, like it's been a while since I've picked up the camera, you get 5 solid days of nothing but shooting every morning, shooting every evening. If it's overcast, shooting in big chunks in the afternoon, like in the woods or in waterfalls or whatever. And so it's really just this kind of great intensive course that continues to push me as a photographer to learn, to grow, to see what other people are doing, to refine my own approaches. And so that's uh, really just kind of how it's worked for me to continue to grow.
Before we recorded the episode, and when Jen and I were talking, she had pointed out that on these workshops, especially if you're going to places that you're not familiar with, or maybe you've been inspired by a location and you've wanted to go for a long time, but it's your first time going. If you go with a workshop leader that is familiar with that area, that location, the good spots, you can maximize your time spent there because you're not spending hours and a bunch of time driving around. You're just going to the good spots right off the bat. That's huge for planning and for time management. I mean, I feel like that's reason enough to sign up for a workshop.
Absolutely. And I've also found that, you know, there's certain locations that, kind of have the big spot, the popular spot that everybody photographs, the icons. What I found is that kind of the best workshop leaders don't ever take you to those icons. They're like, anybody can photograph them. If you want to stay an extra day or two after the workshop, go ahead, you can photograph the icons. They know the areas well enough that they can take you to kind of the off the beaten path places to see things that you wouldn't normally see. The back roads, the places that take an hour to get to down a rocky dirt road, and so that's a really efficient use of time, and it's a way to see an area and almost kind of be forced to take your own image of it rather than, okay, here's the icon. Everybody takes this shot. Let me line up with all 25 other photographers and get the same shot as everybody else. Really the best workshops are the ones where, you get to an off the beaten path location and then they'll say, okay, this trail is half a miles long and there's stream along the whole trail. There's some waterfalls and cascades along the whole trail. You've got 2 hours here, maybe more. Explore. Find your own image. Find what speaks to you. We'll help you. We'll point out a couple great starting places if you are feeling lost. But just, make this time your own. And I think, so you're getting a great opportunity to, efficiently use your time that you would never have found that place on your own. But also getting that chance to explore and to stretch yourself and to see things your own way.
Yeah, that's just exactly what I would hope for in a workshop myself, is avoiding the postcard locations and getting to those harder to find spots. And one thing that you had mentioned in there is how, you learn from different people, their different shooting techniques, their different shooting styles, especially when you're in a large group. You're going to be with such a large talent pool where you're going to have beginners, you're going to have pros, and everything in between. When you're learning from others, whether it be the workshop leaders or maybe it's a participant in the workshop, how are you learning from others while maintaining your personal style without losing that aspect of what makes your work uniquely yours?
Trying to keep in mind always the question of what is it that is drawing me to this environment? What is it that's connecting with who I am and is making me excited? And so I remember one example, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago. We were literally along a stream with multiple cascades, and there was one cascade that kind of everybody stood on the same rock and shoot, and then moved on. And I was kind of playing around, and I was like, I really want something different. I really like this cascade, but I want something different. And I just kind of stood there and moved around for a while and looked around for a while, and eventually I found kind of a crevasse in the rock that had some fall leaves in it, and I got got way down. I couldn't even get my tripod in there. I think I had the camera like half balanced on my foot and was bent over crazy, but I got the shot that I loved with leaves in the foreground leading to the waterfall in the background and then the trees beyond that, and nobody got that shot. That was just my shot from standing there and saying, "Oh, I like this, but there's something about it that's not quite doing it for me." I just played around until I found the image that did just kind of make me sing and make me happy. And
I like how you explained how you were basically balancing it on your foot there. Like sometimes you got to do some wild things to make an image work. I mean,
especially when you're balancing it on your foot and focus stacking it and then trying to double check your focus and then doing it over again. It took a while, but it was worth every moment.
yeah. And that's how the best photos come to be, because it's not just that you have this beautiful image or scene, you have this awesome story behind that image, and it actually builds into the next question I was going to ask is how are you balancing inspiration versus imitation in photography where you've already explained it at a few points in our discussion where you want to be unique, you want it to be yours, and of course nobody else got that shot because of your approach and the way you're doing the or approaching different scenes. When it comes to inspiration and imitation, is that like a staple in all of your work, I would assume, based on what you've said so far? Or are you taking inspiration from others and kind of building your own scenes in some circumstances as well?
Yeah, you know, I've known photographers who insist, "Oh, I never look at anybody else's photos," and and I'm like, "Well, I'm glad that works for you." But I like looking at other people's photos. And, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes when I'm on a workshop, if one of the leaders or one of the participants has this great shot and they've got their camera set up somewhere, and I look through the back of their viewfinder, I'm like, "Oh, I love that shot. I want that too. I'll take the shot. I'll put my tripod exactly where theirs was and take the shot." But, there's something in taking that shot and then stepping back and going, "What is it that I like about this? What is it that is making me feel, wow, this is a great shot?" Um, so that you're not just taking a picture and walking away, you're kinda analyzing it into something that then you can apply somewhere else. Taking those concepts of, well, how was this framed? How did the foreground connect to the background? How did the composition of this enhance it or whatever? That's something that then you just take with you and you move on to another scene and then think, how can I love this, and this is my own. And now how am I going to approach it in a way that makes it an excellent image as well?
Yeah. Yeah. That actually, it made me think back to one of my first trips to Bond Falls in the Upper Peninsula. I stood there for like 3 hours trying to get a decent shot. And I was like, I don't know, man, I give up, whatever. And on my way out, I met this other individual and he was like, yeah, it's my second day back here. I was shooting yesterday, blah, blah, blah. And he just took his camera out and he started showing me a few images on the back of his camera. And I did the same thing. I was like, wow, that's a really great composition. So naturally, I went back up top where the Z is and I set my camera up and I was basically setting up to take a very similar composition. I mean, this was probably 6 years, maybe more ago now, but it was that same thing where you're all excited, you're ready to go, but then you kind of have to take a step back and ask yourself, well, instead of just imitating, like, what is it that I really like about this? Because that is usually, at least from my experience, that is usually that connection piece that's going to differentiate your image from the next person's and the next person's is what's speaking to you and how you're representing that in a scene.
And I would say that, I've been going to workshops now for, ugh, I don't know, 12 years, 13 years, quite a long time. Um, Actually probably longer. Um, and when I started out, certainly I was definitely seeing what someone else took and then taking it myself, and then and then doing the same thing, seeing what someone else took and then taking it myself. But now I see that, as I've learned, as I've grown and matured and stretched myself, that it still happens, of course, but it happens less and less. That sometimes I look at someone else took and I'm like, that's fantastic, great job, and then I don't take the same shot. um so but it's still a learning thing. I could think of one example where, a workshop leader I've worked with multiple times, we were in the Smoky Mountains together and he took an image And I was like, "Oh my word, that's amazing." And, I kind of paid attention to how he composed it. And he took it as a vertical instead of a horizontal. And it was great. Well, then actually a workshop a couple years later, I was in a totally different location. I think it was Vermont or New Hampshire. And I remembered that shot he took, and I was able to use that same kind of technique for a very different scene. Um, but I was like, "Oh, yeah, I really liked that. Let me see if I can use that here." And then it turned out to be a great image, which I really loved. And nobody else took that shot in the workshop. So yeah, so sometimes it kind of comes in down the road. It doesn't always happen right away, but it's just kind of a constant exposure to seeing people doing things differently, and um, remembering those moments of, oh, that different approach really made a difference. And then, it comes into your mind late months later, years later, and helps you approach things with your own take as the scene warrants.
Yeah, that's a I had a very similar learning experience in my early beginnings. I would see an image that I thought was just incredible, and I'd pack up my gear and I'd plan out a trip, and I'd go and I'd take the same shot. And I feel like it's part of the stages of photography for really all photographers. We're imitating what inspires us. Of course, we see images on Instagram, Facebook, social media, magazines, whatever we might be looking at. Some images you see and you're like, yeah, that's a cool shot. But then there's other images that you see and you're like, oh my goodness, yes, this image is immaculate. And then you go and you want to do something similar. But over time, like you mentioned, you see those images and instead of thinking, how can I go and basically duplicate this, you're thinking more about what are the techniques? What are the details behind this that helps you apply the same, call it style, in another image down the line? And I find myself doing that all the time now where I'll see somebody's shot. Actually, your Milky Way shot comes to mind with the illuminated shed that you have there, kind of in the midground. And I was just thinking the other day, I was like, I've got to find some abandoned buildings or some little stuff like that, so that when the Milky Way core is up and it's more visible here in a couple months, I can start doing some stuff like that. And it's cool how those techniques and approaches all kind of blend together and help shape your style.
Yeah. Actually, that shot that you're referencing, that's on my Instagram page. Um, that was done this summer at a workshop in Colorado, and it was a very stretching workshop because I don't normally photograph the Milky Way. I like to be in bed by that time of the day. But the two workshop leaders were very much, love blue hour photography, love Milky Way photography. So we were kind of coming back from a place we had been shooting, and we're in this little ghost town called Animas Forks, and we decided to stop here. And there were a lot of wildflowers in the foreground, but it was really breezy, and we were kind of all struggling to figure out, "Yeah, what do we do here?" And the workshop leader was like, "Well, okay, the flowers aren't holding still, so there's nothing you can do about that. This isn't a bump your ISO up to 12,000 or whatever." She's like, just shoot at f2.8. The flowers can be blurry. That's fine. We're going to put a light in this cabin, and we're going to shoot the cabin, and so, we did that, and just got a good composition with the blurry flowers in the cabin and the mountains in the background. Now, that particular shot was taken at blue hour with a cloudy sky. No Milky Way. But we knew where the Milky Way would be later when the clouds went away. So then that night, once we got back to the cabin, um, everything took forever because we were driving on these mining roads. You can only go like 3 miles an hour in four-wheel drive Jeeps. So, an hour later, we get back to the cabin that we were staying at, and we all went out and we shot the Milky Way. And then the leaders taught us how to merge these two images so that it would actually be an authentic representation of where the Milky Way would be in the cabin scene. So, it is an image blend. It is not, it is in essence a sky replacement, but it is authentic to what it would have looked like had we stayed there for another couple of hours. And it's just a growing experience. It's learning these new techniques that maybe I'm never going to do it much in the future. I'm not big on sky replacements. I'd rather just shoot what's really there. But it's a skill, it's a technique, it's worth practicing. And I did explain on my Instagram post, this is a combination of two images. So I don't want to put it out there and be like, "Oh, look at the Milky Way, how it was," because that's not true. And I don't want to misrepresent any of my images as, you know, putting an amazing sunset in a place that it didn't happen. And that's me, and I'm not judging anybody who does that, but I do like to explain that this is what I learned, this is the technique that we practiced, and this is the result, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, believe it or not, that is a huge part of astrophotography is compositing, and it's something that I struggled with for years. I would look at all these professional photographers that are professional astrophotographers. I would look at their work and I'd be like, how are they doing this in one image? Like, I can barely get my foreground to look decent, and these guys are knocking it out of the park. And then, you learn different approaches, you talk to different photographers, and, they're taking a blue hour shot. And then maybe some of them are staying in the same place, others are going to a different location, but they're compositing where the Milky Way would otherwise be. Um, I've done it in some of my scenes too. So don't feel bad. I do the same thing. I will mark in there like this is a composite image of where XYZ in the sky would be otherwise. But I do it, for two reasons. One, to be authentic and honest with your audience, but also two, because those are the little tidbits of information that I wish I would have had when I first started instead of spending, 2 years in astrophotography frustrated and thinking I basically sucked because I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and that's just I don't think I would have ever learned that skill just on my own. I mean, you can watch YouTube videos and you can read about it, but there's something about being there with someone who knows how to do it and guiding you through the process, and the excitement you can see when it comes together. Yeah, it's a great thing to learn directly from someone out in the field and to then share it with other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it really brings us into like pushing boundaries in landscape photography because learning those different approaches and the different methods in post production or even just in the field, it helps you to kind of formulate a plan for each scene as you approach it. There's really nothing that's outside the realm of possibility once you've established all these different approaches and these different ways of doing things. When you're out shooting for yourself, just, you know, maybe you're in a workshop, maybe you're just solo somewhere that inspires you. What techniques do you use that help you just keep your work fresh and exciting?
Um, I wish I could say, "Oh yes, I do X, Y, and Z," and it keeps it fresh and exciting. It is there's still an element of looking at other people's work and seeing what people are doing and using that as inspiration. Um, but I think sometimes you just have to force yourself to get out. Like it doesn't always happen. Um, you just have to say, look, I'm going to spend 2 hours here. I'm just going to be here and we're going to see what happens. Because a lot of time inspiration, doesn't happen right away. Like you said, you get to an area, you're all excited and, or you don't even know. So, like I said, I live in Holland, Michigan, home of tulip time. And, my favorite thing to do is to start photographing tulips before the crowds get here because they usually bloom for a nice wide range of time. And, sometimes I bring my kids to school in the morning with the camera in the car, and then I go to one of the nearby parks or places tulips are planted and just walk around and just see what it is to see. And again, it's still kind of asking yourself that question of what is connecting with me? What am I seeing? What is standing out to me? And then again, it's slowing down, it's observing, it's seeing what the light is doing. Um, and so yeah, it's just kind of esoteric hard to put into words, but it's just doing it and kind of what getting it's kind of like once you get those creative juices flowing, they just start to come out more and more. And then you start to see more stuff and you get excited about what you photographed and you play around with it a little bit more and then you see something else. And um so yeah, I'm always sometimes when I'm home, it's hard to just break out of the routine, even though I love photography. Sometimes I procrastinate a little bit. So sometimes I just have to tell myself, get outside, just, go do this. The snow fell yesterday. It's going to melt in an hour. Get outside, walk in the woods, because you're going to be happy with yourself after you do it. And you're going to kick yourself if you don't. Um, so it is just really for me, a lot of it is just getting out and letting myself calm down and just looking, just observing, um, and trying new things, never being afraid to try new things. If it doesn't work out, who cares? It's just bites on a disc, or on an SD card. You don't have to keep it.
Exactly. And storage is cheap, and it's never been easier to just get out and try and experiment. It's not like back in film where you've got 24 shots and you can't see them until you go and get them developed or what have you. It's snap, click, look at the back of your camera and, oh, hey, look, that's working. Or, hey, maybe it's not. And just forcing yourself to get out. I really like that you mentioned that because it's something I have to tell myself to do all the time too. Is I'll be looking out the window, especially this time of year where the snow starts melting and it's just, for lack of a better term, it's just brown sticks.
It's just
Everything.
break season. Yes.
Yes. You're just sitting there and you're like, well, there's really nothing at all inspiring about anything going on out there. I'm just going to wait it out. Where's spring? And just pushing yourself to get out there anyways, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah. One of the things that's actually helped me a lot as seasons changing is remembering that macro is always an option. I do a fair amount of macro work with flowers and stuff, especially in the spring, especially when things aren't looking that great, but there's little bulbs are starting to pop up. And one of the funnest classes I took was actually an online workshop about macro photography. And I took it in the dead of January. And a lot of what I was doing was going to the store and buying flowers and then taking pictures of them in my dining room or wherever the window light was good. But um, one of the assignments was to go outside and take pictures too. And I was like, what am I going to find outside? It's January in Michigan. Um, and I had a great time. I found, little buds that I hadn't even realized were there on my dogwood trees. And, just a variety of things that when you force yourself to look and really pay attention and just slow down, you can find a lot is inspiring and is beautiful and is fun to photograph, especially if you're playing around with a lens that you don't normally use or just a different approach. in general that can really isolate and draw attention to details that, you if seeing the world with a 14 to 24 lens is a whole different ball game than seeing the world with a 105 millimeter macro lens.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that that's something that your portfolio has quite a bit of, is that macro photography, and really breaking out of what most landscape photographers think of. Oh, I got to shoot this at, super wide, 14 millimeters, 20 millimeters. You're going the total opposite direction and going 105 millimeter macro or what have you, down to the details that make up the details. I always thought that was really cool with macro photography, and I've tried macro myself, and I'm still working on it, because it's a totally different world. It's a totally different approach. But how do you kind of pick your subjects and, find places in nature that just are going to work as a macro scene?
It's still really, there's the stuff that I photographed before, the spring flowers and everything, but still it's just kind of a get out and start walking around and, looking through the lens and exploring, you know, it's still, some of those same principles still apply. Like, what is the light doing? And I love backlight. Backlight is one of my favorites, and I do it in my high school senior pictures. I do it in my landscape photography. I do it in macro photography. I love backlight. So it's really like looking around, seeing what the light is doing, letting yourself examine things that you might otherwise just walk right on by, and playing with different perspectives, shooting down, shooting up. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of the same approach that makes a good photo, whether it's a wide grand landscape, or just looking. But it really is observing. It really is slowing down. It really is being willing to explore. Um, and once I heard of a photographer who would have a class, and he gave each one of them like a three square meter area of ground, and like, this is your area. You need to make a photo in it. And every once in a while, I try something like that. You just have to make sure you're not on pavement for it. It's pretty dull, but
Slightly limiting on a 3 foot by 3 foot square piece of pavement. I could
yeah.
totally understand that. But I do like that approach. And that's the first time I've heard of something like that. That's really cool. And I mean, you're right. It's all about the light. That's really where the foundation of photography begins, is the light. And one thing I always try to remind myself when I'm out there is, don't look for things, look for the light, because that's where photography lives. And it's something that I think would benefit all photographers that are just starting to just remind themselves of that. Because when I first got into it, I was always looking for things. I was always searching out, like, oh, well, there's got to be maybe go to Chicago because Chicago's pretty, or go to this place because it's got waterfalls, or what have you. And when you stop thinking about the things and start thinking about the light, it just opens so many more doors.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, so thinking about light is super important, and thinking about, w- what is the weight in this image? What is the most important element? What are you trying to communicate? What's the emotion you're trying to communicate? What's the feeling, the element that you want most people to connect to? And then, shaping that image, to do that along with the light and what it's doing and everything. And, I think we can all remember learning about, it's really important to have something in the foreground of the image. And then all of us go to the lake and we're like, look, a rock. And we put the rock in the foreground and it's still a crappy photo
Yes.
until, until you realize, well, it's not really what's in the foreground, it's what the foreground's doing and where it's pointing and where the eye is going. And yeah, so it's just kind of that constant learning, remembering that the kind of general principles of what makes a good image apply to the vast majority of images, whether you're doing, yeah, architectural photos in Chicago or macro photos of flowers or portraits of people. A lot of those principles are going to apply across the board. So it's important to kind of keep them in mind as you're exploring.
When you're thinking landscapes or considering inspiration, pushing your boundaries, are you actively seeking out new locations, or do you like to revisit familiar places with new perspectives? Maybe one weekend you're hiking the shoreline with, a 70 to 200, and then the next weekend you're coming back with your macro lens. Do you kind of switch it up like that?
Well, I always have all my lenses in my backpack. I'm never gonna, yeah, with very few exceptions, they're always available. It's kind of a combination. I do like to explore new locations, but again, that's one of the things that I find hardest just with the other responsibilities I have and the various routines in my life. Um, so I do like to do that, and that's part of why I go on the photography workshops, helps me find the new locations. Recently, I was able to go to Vermont 2 Octobers in a row. No, it wasn't Vermont, it was New Hampshire, and, 2 different workshop leaders, they're friends, but they actually hit the same locations in New Hampshire, and so several of them I went to twice, and it was kind of funny because there were a couple of them that I was like, "Oh, I don't really wanna go back here. I didn't really like that spot that much." And then I went back and I'm like, "Oh, there's plenty to photograph here. You just have to," sometimes it was actually better to go back a second time, like, kinda like your experience at Bond Falls, like, you just it's important to become familiar with an area, and I wouldn't call myself familiar with an area just because I visited it twice, but, to see it again and to find different scenes within it and, being open to, well, just because you didn't get a great shot or what you thought was a great shot the first time doesn't mean there's not really good images to be found. Um, so yeah, so it's definitely a combination. And then I know that there's certainly people who kind of go to the same spot over and over and over and over. And that's that's great. And because you when you know an area really well, that can be such an asset to your photography. But I feel like when I'm challenged by going to places I don't know and seeing them for the first time, it can hopefully help me come back to the places that I do know with a fresh perspective and with um, the mental capacity to try to see it with fresh eyes, if at all possible, and to take that different composition or to take that different approach. And it doesn't always happen, but at least it's a way to keep things fresh and then not boring, not just, well, here's the same scene with the sunset today. Here's the same scene with the sunset today.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And, it's very similar. It's no secret to those that listen to the podcast, those that follow my work. I go to the Porcupine Mountains all the time. And like you said, you go to a place, maybe sometimes you don't always get a great shot. Doesn't mean that there's not great shots to be had there. And I really like how you said that and how you worded that, because it's true. Just because you go somewhere and maybe it's a dreary day, maybe it's rainy, and yeah, okay, maybe it looks a little not the greatest today, and then the next day you decide to go somewhere totally different, but then you see somebody else's picture, they stuck it out, they waited, and the rain cleared at sunset and you got brilliant clouds and a rainbow and all these great things. It's those, that being patient and just understanding that it might not be great right now, but that doesn't mean that it'll never be great. And it's the same thing with all locations, I think, in landscape photography as a whole, really.
Yeah, and there's also no question too that the frame of mind that you're in when you come to a scene is always going to impact the photos that you take. And if you didn't get a great night's sleep, or there's other stuff that you're dealing with, or it could be the most beautiful scene, and you can just not feel it. Um, and then you can come back another time in a different frame of mind and a different attitude and an openness, and you can find all kinds of great stuff to photograph. But that's and that's why, as photographers, our work is a reflection of us. It's also a reflection of who we are on that day, who we are in that hour. You know, what else is going on is going to impact the photos that we take.
Definitely. And it's that flow state of mind that you get somewhere and you kind of have to be able to pack everything going on outside of your experience into a box, into a drawer, whatever you want to call it, and kind of allow yourself to be one with nature. And it's like a unique state of mind where you're focused, you're seeing, and to your point, yeah, if you're excited and you're happy and you're open minded and focused, you're going to see things all over the place. Whereas if you're sad, you're upset, maybe you didn't get a good night's sleep, yeah, you're going to be thinking about what's going on, or man, I wish I could just had a cup of coffee, or what have you. And it's going to be distracting. It's going to take away from the potential that is there.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're humans. We have a lived experience, and it's okay if you're not having a great day. It's okay if the scene isn't speaking to you. At least you went out. At least you were there for a few minutes or an hour or whatever it is. It's good in all things. It's good to be able to give ourselves grace and just be like, "Hey, it didn't happen for me today for whatever reason, and that's okay." And that doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't make my work less of less quality. It's just part of being a human being in the world. And so yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind too, and to be kind to ourselves and give ourselves grace as well.
Yes, I agree entirely. And that's something that I always remind myself of too. I always tell myself there is no such thing as a failed day. Never. You go out, you try, even if you don't come home with a portfolio image, you tried. And trying is enough. And that trying compounds over time. And, maybe today you didn't get the shot, but you practiced a couple things. And the next day, you got an okay shot, but you practiced a couple other things. And on the last day, all the pieces came together. And because you practiced the last couple days just doing whatever you were doing, you knew exactly what settings to be at, where to put the camera, what lens to use. There's never a failed experience. There's never a wasted trip, because as long as you're out there trying and learning, that's succeeding as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, 100%. And I've even had that experience on a larger scale. There was a workshop I went to a few years ago, and the photographer is phenomenal, does incredible work. But as a workshop leader, and many people love this person as a workshop leader and go to many of his workshops, but I didn't gel or sync with this person and their approach to the workshop. And actually struggled. I felt really out of my element because, I wanted to make good images, and it just something about the approach was really kind of creating a creative roadblock for me. And I've never had such a frustrating personal experience. But I mean, I still came away with some things that I learned, some of the techniques and some of the concepts. And then I remember, at another workshop, I think it was later that year, there was a scene that I approached, and I knew exactly what I was doing. I was actually taking the approach of this photographer to make the scene work. And so I'm like, hey, this may not have been the top of my favorite workshop ever list. And there were some moments that I was extremely frustrated. But now I don't think I would have made this particular image had I not gone, had I not had this experience, and then still taken away the things that were valuable for me as a photographer. So, yeah, so they're all they're all can be learning experiences as long as you're willing to give yourself some space, some time to decompress and process.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's huge because just exactly like you said, what you're doing right this second or this experience that you're having on this particular trip or what have you, maybe it doesn't seem great right now. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. Like you said, maybe workshop leader, something happened to your gear, you forgot something at home, what have you. But then, you fast forward, like you said, same year, a few months later, and it's like, hey, that bad experience is going to allow me to have this awesome experience now.
Yeah,
And it's like, you know what? It's a win. It counts.
absolutely.
When you're out there and, you mentioned you're doing lots of workshops all across the country and doing them presumably at different seasons under different conditions. Do different seasons and conditions influence your creative process or your creative approach?
So I don't know that the different seasons necessarily change my creative approach. Certainly, there are places that are a lot more similar to what I'm comfortable and familiar with. You know, the fall in Vermont and New Hampshire is not that dissimilar to fall in Michigan in many ways. So, it can in some ways feel easier to approach that. There's a story that comes to mind that I will forever share with some friends who are part of this. I was on this workshop that was supposed to be a winter in Yosemite exploratory workshop. So it was a leader that was like, "Hey, this is for only a very small group. We're just going to explore Yosemite and see what it's like." And and he hadn't actually been there before. It was really just to together have this new experience. Well, we got to Yosemite. It had literally snowed 2 feet of snow the week before we got there. When we arrived, there was nothing but rain forecast for the next 5 days, like inches of rain, tons of rain. And so we sat around. There was only five of us. We're like, do we stay with rain or do we do something else? And the workshop leader is like, hey, it's only 4 hours to Death Valley and Bishop and Lone Pine to the other side of the Sierras. Do you want to stay here in the rain or do you want to go somewhere else? And we all decided, sure, let's just get out of here. We're going to go to the other side of the mountains. I had never been to Death Valley. I had never been to anything like it before. I don't think I ever would have intentionally signed up for a Death Valley workshop. Other than the fact that it has sand dunes, which we have in Michigan, it was just completely outside of what I had ever thought I would choose to photograph. But we had the best time. We had so much fun, and it was again a really good experience being challenged in a completely different environment, not just trees and nature and fields and some mountains in the background, but it was really amazing, and had a I had a great time, and I was always look back on that as a fabulous photography experience, um, with all of the different things that I saw and was challenged by, and the landscape that's not at all like what I am surrounded in from day to day. So, I mean, I will certainly go back at some point in the future to explore again. And yeah, so again, that was another opportunity of just being open to something new, being ready to just go with the flow and see what happens.
Yeah. That sounds like an awesome experience, though. I mean, to go from Yosemite through the mountains into Death Valley, like that's a trip.
It was. We even had to. I was hiking in the sand dunes in Death Valley in my snow boots because I didn't have anything else along, and we had to stop and buy a couple T-shirts because all we had brought was winter gear.
It's one of those moments where you're like, okay, well, it's 100+ degrees at this place we're going to, and I dressed for 30. Now
Yeah,
what?
exactly. And this is why it's important to always have all of your lenses in your camera bag because you never know what's going to happen down the road.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm right there with you. I carry all my lenses. A couple of my friends, they're very much minimalist. Keep your pack as light as possible. And I don't know, maybe you feel the same, but when I go out without one of my core lenses, I feel like I've left my kid at home by
Oh,
himself.
absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Going to as many workshops as I have, you hear all the time from participants, what lenses should we bring? And the vast majority of the workshop leaders are always like, all of them.
Yeah.
you know, we just drove somewhere. Which camera and lens should I get out of the car? All of them. That's why you have a backpack. That's
Yep. Bring it all.
with a few exceptions. There's every once in a while they're like, well, you really don't need a wide angle here. You're just going to need this, and that's fine. But in general, always have all the lenses.
Yeah. The only lens that I have found that is a very situational lens is my 180 to 600.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And like, unless I'm going after wildlife or if I'm trying to hide out in the back of my car in like a rainstorm, windstorm, whatever, and shoot a lighthouse in the distance, I don't need that kind of a focal range. Like that's insanity.
Yeah, I have that lens, and I think I've used it in the Palouse of Eastern Washington. I don't know if you've ever been to that. There's a really tall butte in the middle that you can drive up and just shoot these rolling landscapes. And like the longer lens you have, the better. So I mean, I shot a lot of stuff at 500 and 600 millimeters. So I used it there, and then I've used it. Same thing. Some lighthouses, some some crashing waves, and that's kind of been the extent of it. So that one's not in my backpack usually.
Yeah, that's about the same experience I've had. I bought it a little over a year ago now, and I was all pumped, ready to go. I was like, yes, I finally have this super telephoto lens. It's going to open so many possibilities. And then I took it out and I was like, this thing's heavy. It's unwieldy. It turns my camera into like a hot air balloon. Like it's huge. And I actually find that most of the time I'll use it for like moon rises, stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that, where I can
Mhm.
really make the moon really big against a foreground element like a barn or a tree or what have you. But just because I had it, I actually took it with me to the Porcupine Mountains this past October, and I brought it up with me to the Overlook one morning just to have some fun with it. And I put it on, and I'll never forget. I took the lens cap off. I looked through it, and I was like, I'm only at 180 millimeters, and I'm already too zoomed in for anything I want to shoot. Like, what's the point of this?
Yeah.
But for wildlife, for unique stuff like that, especially like in the Palouse, which is somewhere it's actually on my bucket list of places that I want to go. I've seen images from there, and those rolling hills, like the vibrant greens, it looks like a magical place.
It's pretty amazing. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that and of course Yosemite as well. The redwoods, the redwoods in Yosemite are two different places, but when you talk California,
Mhm.
you Yosemite, that's up there. One day I got to wait for the kids to get a little older so they can come with and hopefully enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely.
As far as keeping the passion alive long term, it sounds like throughout our discussion you've really outlined a lot of different ways that you do this. But to bring it all together, when you are thinking about, keeping that passion alive long term and just pushing yourself to get out there, how are you feeling or how are you staying motivated when maybe some days it feels just like a part of your routine? How are you continuously motivating yourself to just keep going?
I'm very much an advocate of listening to myself. You know, listening to my body, listening to what's going on in my heart, in my head. Um, and so I feel like if you're really paying attention to what's going on inside of you, it's not that you don't have to push yourself. It's that, I mean, there's obviously a time. There's times when, like, I'm just procrastinating and being lazy. I need to get outside. But I think that your body will tell you if you just need to take a break for a while. You know, creativity thrives on time to relax, time to process, time to feel very free from stress. And so if you're feeling stressed, like, I have to get out, I have to make myself do this, I'm not excited about it. Maybe there's a reason that you're not feeling it right now. And it's a good idea to explore that because if you're, like people who are in writer's block, there's usually something going on, and they often find they need to do something different for a while, something unique, something that's out of the ordinary, or even just walk away from it altogether. I realize writers have these pressures and deadlines of book commitments and book deals and everything, but for me as a person and a photographer right now, I don't have any of those pressures. So I can create when I'm excited to create, and I can not bring my camera with me on vacation if I just want to be in the moment and not behind the camera. So I feel like letting myself flow with those seasons of being creative, getting out, doing something, signing up for the workshop, and the seasons of I don't feel like doing anything right now, and that's okay. There's a gorgeous sunset happening at the beach right now, and I'm not there. I can see it through the trees out of my living room, and I'm not there, and that's okay. Um, so I feel like it is kind of that giving yourself permission to be balanced, to flow, and then step away from it. That's kind of what's going to give you longevity. That's what's going to help you be excited about photography long term, and create fresh creativity in the long run. Um, because stress and pressure and feeling like you have to do something, that's a really good way to kill your enjoyment of it. So that's kind of my perspective. I like to say I want to be one of those old people who's still out there photographing and hiking and exploring for years to come. And I think that's going to be my approach is uh, I'm just going to give myself the time to do it and then the time to not do it.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
And that's something that I think all of us have to come to terms with at some point in our journey. Because, yeah, when you get your first camera, you're motivated to be out there every second of every day. And all you want to do is shoot and explore and do all that. But eventually, yeah, you run into burnout and you kind of hit that creator's block of, hey, I need to take a step back. I need to recharge. And I mean, I just went through it this past week. I was actually, last week, I was supposed to go up to Marquette for my second winter trip of 2025. My kids got sick and my wife wasn't feeling good. So I was like, all right, well, duty calls. I have an obligation to them first. I'm going to push it back a week. I'm going to take care of my family. And I was actually supposed to be leaving again tomorrow. I was going to leave and go up there. And, through this weekend leading up to that, or leading up to this rather, I was thinking to myself, I don't really feel motivated to do it. I don't feel like it's the right thing to do. And that creative block just kind of formed. And it was like, yeah, you have to listen to your heart. You have to listen to your mind, your body, your spirit, and just say, hey, you know what? If I'm not feeling it, it's okay to pass on a trip. It's okay to stay home and relax once in a while, or just like you said, go out without a camera. It's something that a little habit that I've gotten into with my trips actually is on the very last day for sunrise, I'll go out, I'll sit down at one of my spots that maybe I've already shot it, or maybe it's just wherever I think is going to be a neat place to watch sunrise. I'll make myself a cup of coffee. I'll leave all the gear in the car and I'll just go watch it. Just be present. And doing that, I have found, kind of recharges those creative batteries in a way, and it gets you excited for the next one. You realize I shouldn't spend every second of my life looking through a viewfinder. I need to experience this just as much as I want to share this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's such a huge part of it, that it inspires that creativity and it sparks creativity for the next one.
Yeah, very much. And I was also just realizing that, that as much as that solitude of being in the environment is refreshing and restorative, um, you know, there's many times that there's several beautiful woods near I live and trails that, I just go. I don't take my camera. I just go and enjoy it. And I might grab a couple snapshots on my phone, but I'm not taking a picture. But the other thing that is really helpful for me is, again, part of why I do workshops is photography with other people. And I have made friends literally across this country who love photography. And when I can connect with them, or, make a plan to join them in a workshop, or I've had friends, come here and we go out shooting together. And I know that's not necessarily something that everybody is motivated by, but for me, it's a big factor in sharing that experience with others and reconnecting with others through that. I mean, I definitely need my downtime. I'm not a 100% social person. Like, please just give me my quiet hotel room now after I've been with people. But knowing that are people to look forward to being with and sharing the excitement of photography, is definitely a motivator for me, both in the short term and long term as well.
Yeah, I think that helps with creativity a lot. I mean, I've said it before previously myself where, photography does not have to be a solo pursuit. You should share your passion with other people and people that share that same passion, and getting out there as a group, whether it be a group of friends, a workshop, maybe there's just a local camera club that meets every Sunday, every Saturday, whatever the case might be. Doing that it's fun, it's rewarding, because it's not just, hey, I'm going out to be by myself in a forest again.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it can be fun. And there's times where, like you, yes, I think we all get there where it's like, yes, give me my quiet hotel room, or please just let me sit at this waterfall by myself for a little while so I can just take it all in.
Yes,
But then there's other times where you find something awesome, unique, beautiful, and you just want to share it. You think to yourself, especially I find myself thinking all the time, if I find something cool by myself, I'm like, man, I can't wait to tell my friends about this. I can't wait to share this with my family and my photographer friends and bring these people here to see this, because this is great. And it's it's not just about our experience, but it's about the cumulative experience of how we share it and who we share it with that really makes it special.
absolutely. And now, ultimately that's kind of why we do photography is to share places with others in the format of a picture. Certainly we do photography for ourselves too. There's plenty of images that I've taken that I've never shared with anybody, but ultimately it's a shared experience. That's why I have a website. That's why I post to Instagram. That's why I put stuff on Facebook to engage others in the experience that I'm having at a place as well.
Yeah. And I think that helps to sustain creativity just as much as seeing inspirational work too. Is it's of course our motivation shouldn't be like chasing algorithms or feeding the hungry social media machine. We can never win that battle.
Nope.
But to share it with the people that engage with your work, and maybe they're inspired. That's something that I've always thought to myself: if me sharing an image inspires just one person to get out there and visit that place, or go to a place that it reminds them of,
Hmm.
that's a win as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, it's that sustaining that creativity and just pushing the boundaries and everything we've discussed. Really, it all kind of culminates in that sharing it with others piece. And you know, I think that brings it together very, very well.
Yeah. Um, Actually, it reminds me of one more thing is so I don't have my work in a gallery. I would love to. One of the challenges of living in a lakeside community is when people want to buy artwork, they want to buy lakeshore artwork. And unfortunately, pictures of Zion National Park don't really sell very well for tourists. But my husband is a physician. He's actually an oncologist, a cancer doctor. And I have had the honor of being able to decorate essentially his office and a couple of the other offices in his practice with a lot of my work. Um, I have some of my macro flower photography on canvases in the hallways. I have matted and framed prints in most of the patient rooms. I have some medals on the walls in the lobby. And he regularly tells me, I had two more comments on your photos today. And it's not just, oh, they're just beautiful photos, but these people are going through a lot when they're visiting the doctor. They might have a life-threatening illness, um, and they get to sit in a room with an image that I love, that hopefully is speaking to them and giving them reassurance in a way, just a small comfort in what otherwise is an extremely difficult situation. And so, yeah, so I am able to reach out and touch people that I will never meet probably, um, in that way. And that's really an honor for me to know that I can help, that I can be a small part of people's lives and experience, uh, just because I love being behind a camera and seeing the world and being able to share little pieces of it with others.
That's huge. And as someone who has experienced that side of things, and it's interesting the connection that your husband is in oncology and your images are at the hospital that or in the offices that he works in. My father actually, he passed away 5 years ago, but he had passed of cancer, and he used to comment. He knew he loved photography as well, and obviously I do too. And he would make comments to me about the pictures that he would see, and they're all the different hospitals he went to and all the different places, and he'd come back from a visit and say, "Oh, you should have seen this picture on the wall. This was, there was a beautiful meadow, or it was a beautiful mountain range." And it makes a difference. It does. So, you know, having seen it firsthand, that's beautiful. And it makes a difference. It makes an impact on people that, yes, they're going through difficult times, and having that piece of serenity amongst that stress. It makes a difference. It really does.
Yeah, just I'm very honored to be able to provide that in just a small way.
Yeah, that's monumental. Very selfless, which is, I think, a part of all of us as photographers is, we're the sharing type. We like to inspire and share and provide that intrigue and wonder and that hope through our images. And it, you know, even if it, like I said, even if it resonates with just one person, it's a success in that capacity. As we bring everything together, we'll close it out with one last question. What advice would you give photographers that feel as though they might be struggling to reignite their creativity or get themselves out of a creative rut, something we all face?
Well, I would really say try to find a way to connect with other photographers. You know, for me, workshops have been huge, and I know they're an investment of time and money and travel. But like you said, a local camera club can be a great way to connect, to learn, to be challenged and stretch yourself. So I feel like that's really the best thing I can give is when something's not working anymore, when you're going to the same place over and over and you don't feel like you're improving or you don't feel like things it's not working anymore. um to me that's one of the biggest ways to stretch yourself is to go somewhere else, to meet people and learn from them and try to see the world a little bit through their eyes and let them teach you, let them challenge you. And reach out to other photographers that may live in your area, and even ask, "Hey, could I meet you for a shoot? Can I connect?" One of my really good friends, I met her on a photography workshop, and she was like just starting out. She'd just gotten a camera that year, and she would keep saying to me, "I don't know why you wanna hang out with me. I'm not a good photographer." And I'm like, "Well, I don't care. I'm not judging your photography, but if I can help you in any way, I am more than happy to. If there's, I'll show you whatever. I'll teach you whatever. This isn't a selfish thing that I'm keeping to myself that I don't want anyone else to learn or become a photographer." So, we've become really good friends, and I've watched her work just really mature and develop over the last several years. And so yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to try new things, to join a camera club, to sign up for a workshop. I think that that's really one of the best things that you can do to push yourself along with the other things that we've talked about.
great advice. It really is. And, just getting out of your standard day to day, the locations that you frequent all the time, or, just going out with a friend to a new location, even a location maybe you visited in the past, just like you said earlier, just get out there, just do it, and just try. And, that's something that I think is monumental is you're not going to grow if you're not trying.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
well, I certainly appreciate the discussion and the wonderful information and experience and the stories and everything you've shared with us. How can listeners find your work, buy prints and find you out there?
Sure, it's all pretty much the same. My Instagram is Jennifer Batts Photography. That's JENNIFER, B like boy, ATTS Photography. In my Facebook page is the same, and my website is www.jenniferbattsphotography.com. You can see my senior work at Images by Jennifer, both on Instagram and the web. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, I would be delighted to make contact.
Definitely. I'll include all the links in the show notes below to Jen's website, her Instagram, all that good stuff. So you guys can find her. Everything will be included in the show notes below. And again, Jennifer, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure as well.
Great advice and a great discussion. I hope you all found it helpful as well. And thank you again, Jennifer, for joining us. Don't forget to head over to her links in the show notes below. Give her a follow, check out some of her work. Next week, we are going to be joined by a good friend of mine, Aubrietta Hope, as we discuss going solo into the wilderness and some of her experiences, stories, and advice for getting out there and staying safe when you're on your own. A Michigan-based landscape photographer and wonderful individual is going to be a great discussion you will not want to miss. Make sure that you are subscribed to the show on your favorite podcast platform so that you can be notified when the episode becomes available. See you guys on the next one. Take care, everybody.